And welcome everyone to this month's TBM Tuesday, I should say. My name is Justin Mann, and I head up the Standards Research and Education team here for Council, and I'm going to be the alternate host this month. Well, our typical host, Lindsay Gates, is out. So, Lindsay, if you're watching this, just know I'm here keeping the seat warm for you. We've got an exciting session coming up today. We've got John Wilson, Senior Vice President of Digital Product Management at Wells Fargo. John, if you want to give the audience a quick wave. And also Kelley Wendelborn, Director of Technology Business Management here at Lowe's. We got an exciting discussion today on how we connect TBM, use TBM, I should say, to connect infrastructure and IT service management areas up to the value drivers for organizations. These are areas that tend to get glossed over, kind of deprioritized in terms of strategy and investment. And John and Kelley are making some great headway in using TBM to elevate these spaces up to where they belong in the strategic conversations. A little bit of background here. John and Kelley both have really strong finance and technology backgrounds. So they've been longtime contributors to technology business management and our communities, both longtime contributors to the standards committee. And in fact, the two of you contributed just a year or so back on an ebook for us, Managing the Financials of Agile Teams, where, among other things, you recommended some really cool practices around a labor capitalization eligibility formula. So it's been a really interesting, high-performing asset for us. Anytime the two of you kind of meet up and start exchanging ideas, it always ends up being an interesting win for our communities and for the industry. So let me kick it off from there and, just ask, what are the two of you up to these days, and what are you seeing in the space for TBM?
Kelley, you want to lead off?
Sure. So John and I both talked about we kind of transitioned into different roles, but also similar roles. So we've been on a similar journey. I have our CMDB and our asset management space at Lowe's, along with software asset management, et cetera, along with our vendor management practices and invoicing. So a little bit different, more of a practitioner now, and a lot of the key data related to TBM and what we've had in Aptio, but not specifically running that organization. But I still stay close with it because I can't get away.
Always good to hear. And John, what about yourself?
Yeah, similarly, I went from years oriented on the portfolio, financial management, strategy, transformation, all of those elements, if you will, and out of the advisory role and into the execution role. So I too am running an ITSM shop at this point in time with about 1,500 people across development and operations. So I often joke that Kelley and I are just the same person at two different companies.
All things considered, I'm really excited about this shift because we've seen from our data in the TBM research space that a lot of the focus always gets applied for TBM to AI initiatives, those business enabling digital products and services. And we kind of gloss over the infrastructure and ITSM spaces, and we're still, I think, missing a really great opportunity where I don't know, it feels like a lot of the operations people are still using traditional IT service management metrics and not tying those up to communicate the real value that they're contributing to the strategy, the organization as a whole. Is that so? Are you guys seeing that, and how are you bringing TBM over to this new space? What opportunities are you seeing there?
So I think if we can start 9 years ago when we first implemented TBM at Lowe's. The main foundational data we had was our financials, obviously, and then our CMDB. So our infrastructure and those relationships there so that we could figure out application total cost of ownership, et cetera. And in that, we discovered that there were some opportunities within the CMDB data. And that team could have taken it one of two directions, right? They could have said, stop using our data then and gotten defensive, or we partnered. And so we found a way to create wins within their organization too. Obviously, I didn't have the CMDB at that time. and created dashboards to say, here's like the percentage of servers mapped to applications. And we have a goal percentage and increasing that every month and showcase that as wins for the organization. So really help drive success in their space by leveraging their data, which I think is definitely impactful. When you're just starting out on that journey, you're trying to get people bought in, people supporting you, people on that journey with you, and being able to create wins there. And then, John and I have been talking a little bit about how there's so much value in that space, and you can continue that organizational change management and continue those wins by showcasing the value that you're getting in those areas.
I want to highlight that real quick because so many of our members, I think, struggle with getting integrations with the CMDB, or they're getting the sense that the data on that side is not really as mature as they or well governed as they hoped it could be. And you hit on something really key there, which was you gave some wins. You made sure to get some wins for that team, and that built that collaborative link. And it feels like you guys springboarded off of that. So, John, is that something you saw similarly, or were you using any other integrations? Like I know ServiceNow, we have a good integration paper with their common services data model, for example, that was intended for that same thing, to help TBM practices kind of a springboard that space and accelerate, kind of leapfrog progress in that space.
Yeah. So many different ways to look upon it. So when I came into this space, there were roughly 21 applications supporting the constructs and the offerings, if you will, probably
Yeah.
about 16 different policy and process teams and whatnot. So again, approaching this with a TBM mindset, those were all HR organizations, functional organizations and whatnot. So seeing how they collaborate through different types of value streams, if you will, to create the offerings that are really consumable by the bank, like you pointed out, like, what's actually the value, if you will. So demonstrating that the development and the policy and the procedural and the controls all come together to create something like an incident management or change management for the end user, if you will. And so that was one key element of bringing like the TBM mindset to this space, if you will. But then to your note, a dual hat. We do have the entire CSDM within this area. So we are able to take it and align it back to the TBM structures, because initially they were not in alignment. So what we were billing the business for and then what we were articulating in our operations were two different things in our unique situation. Others might find themselves in that situation as well. So we were able to use the frameworks, the technology, and our acumen to start to bring these things into alignment so that we could say, here's how much this costs, but also here's how it's performing on an instant basis, on a change basis, on a service level basis, so forth and so on.
So you guys were able to use TBM as kind of a forcing mechanism to help increase that governance, and almost like a virtuous cycle, maybe of you got some wins for the service management teams, got you better data, helped to mature the integrations there, and kind of go from there. So, okay, next really interesting idea for me is, you started off bridging the collaboration with the service management team and the TBM practices, the data, the CMDBs, and so on. What did you do with that data once you had it? Once you had that integration and you had the insight to the portfolios, the assets, the CMDBs, what did you do from there? And I'm just kind of leading the witness a bit. I'm mainly looking for, again, it's just so many people in this space. They're talking in terms of the same kind of metrics and KPIs we used to think of in like ITIL 10 plus years ago. And I haven't seen maybe an across the board kind of universal elevation of linking IT service metrics up to the value that the organization are really thinking about.
Yeah. So within our areas, within my space, it wasn't just simply reorganizing these individuals to work together, if you will, and the idea of delivering a single offering. It was also establishing OKRs that were business relevant to your note. And it's an interesting thing. We've talked in industry and in prior role about the idea of always being able to translate the value of technology into a business proposition so that there's an awareness of what you're paying for. It's not just like, oh, you paid for developers, you paid for an app, but you paid for this capability that drove this top line, this bottom line adjustment. So what's interesting, I think, in this instance is when you're talking about ITSM, it's kind of the dirty dancing, put baby in the corner. You're so far away from the business. You're not an enabling product that helps their value stream directly. You're sitting in back office and infrastructure, but to add insult to injury, you're not even giving them compute or, databases and things like that they need. You're giving them process and policy, and you kind of get shoved even further back. And it's like, well, what's the value proposition of this thing that's so pervasive, but admittedly far away from what seems like the immediate value stream of the business? So to your note, well, let's talk about that. When you talk about, changes, we all know that changes can create or one of the primary reasons why incidents occur and whatnot. So when you start talking about the percentage of changes that are successful versus failed, you can start translating that into incident mitigation. You can start translating that into customer confidence. How many customers and clients were impacted by incidents? And can you translate that successful changes equals customer confidence? Can you translate that improved mean time to recover in an incident equals better employee productivity and whatnot? So being able to take those constructs that immediately might feel a little bit far back and bring them forward to where the business actually can see that there's a relevance there.
What about your side, Kelley? Any progress on that as well, and kind of elevating those conversations?
Yeah, definitely. And kind of transitioning from my current hat back to the TBM office hat, from an OKR perspective, really just looking at what value are people bringing to the organization. And again, to John's point, it's very easy in those revenue generating spaces, but really forcing the other spaces to think through the deltas of, it may not be revenue generation, but there is value and it does translate to further value, and it's more of an enabling function. And then being able to have those same conversations with a lot of the offices that John talked about that are further removed from the revenue generation areas are also the ones you need data from a TBM perspective. And so being able to create some of those metrics or have those value conversations with those organizations, as John's already mentioned, and talk about the value that they are delivering, I think helps get more buy-in in them giving you their data and getting access to it. And, we can translate, here's some of the data that you've shown, and here's the increase you've shown in this, that's increased customer confidence. And that, is relevant and is one of your OKRs to yield that amount of value. And so not just measuring it and having those conversations within the ITSM space, but also translating that into security, into other areas of infrastructure, into stability metrics across the board that really resonate from a value perspective that isn't just the typical ITSM metrics.
Let's tease that out. I know that's always front in mind for a lot of organizations, is risk and compliance, and also resiliency is a big piece of that as well. And here again, if you're over focused just on the front facing things, the direct things that are being consumed, and you're not thinking about that back end technology supply chain from the infrastructure, it feels like you can miss not just you can have a negative impact on the customer experience, the sustainability if you're driving targets there, the performance, but also the risk and compliance could sink a ship there for the compliance, the resiliency. Is that a space you guys have had an opportunity to actively connect TBM into yet?
Yeah, I mean, we have on the Lowe side, there's a really great white paper around the NIST framework connected to TBM that the TBM Council has put together that I recommend leveraging, but that helps. We've leveraged that to translate that into OKRs in the security and risk management space, and again, have those value-driven conversations.
And John, what about you?
Similarly, I guess I would take a slightly additive angle, not a different angle, but an additive angle. we've stated, and it's visible within the revised framework for TBM. We've stated
Yeah,
that
yeah,
one of the gotchas with TBM historically has been that it's more or less technology financial management. It's an orientation on how much does it cost, how much are you billing, is it a good unit economic, things of that nature. And we've long stated if the only thing you talk to your customer about is how much it costs, the only thing he or she can really debate you on is how much it costs. So if you
right,
want to have a more enriched conversation, you've got to come to the table, just like in any presentation. What you present to someone is what sets the foundation, the canvas for that dialogue. So doubling back on something that you commented on that we briefly discussed, um, if you look at TBM and you work your way up through the layers, it always comes down in my mind to resource and value management. And again, like we all go back to the really concrete example of seeing a car getting produced and the idea that you have human beings. Well, at one point in time, we had human beings on the line, if you will, helping put together the car. And it was really intuitive for people to see physically that's where my capital is deployed. There's humans,
right,
there's
right,
tools, there's software. And at the beginning of the value stream, there was no car. And at the end of it, there was a car. And guess what? When you were able to sell that unit, it was worth more than what you invested on the value stream. It was just a really concrete, tangible thing. But in technology, we don't always have that. It's more of an invisible value stream, we say, and things like that. But when you sow the disciplines and you come from it and go, TBM's about resources and knowing how to align those resources to different things the business is consuming that's meaningful to them. Coming back to what you stated about the CMDB and CSDM, that is the inventory, very literally, of all of those technological components, if you will, or
right.
those resources. So it is helping you paint the picture of that, car manufacturing line and whatnot. Sure enough, what technical services providing this, what business services consuming, and things like that. So when you have this, it's not just to be able to go, look, we created transparency. You cannot have a holistic conversation. Coming back to your immediate question, you can't talk about risk if you can't quantify and define it in a common lens. So it is
Right,
very
right.
much a passion for me that when we talk about something, whether it's a front end product or an infrastructure service, you need a common way of defining and circling those resources so you can say this is how much they cost. This is how much they're building, maybe if they have a development function and whatnot. This is how they're doing their operations and their incident and their problems, their changes. This is how they're doing in their risk management. Like the beauty of it is when you have a concise way of defining the variables, you're able to really do a 360 around it and have a very enriched dialogue about not just how much it costs, but now what's it doing for you? And to your note, how is it performing from a risk management perspective and all these other dimensions?
Fantastic. I like it. I like it. And I want to kind of anchor this back to both of you guys have been instrumental, well, for years really in different iterations of the TBM taxonomy that we use to build and govern our TBM models, but also this past year, more recently, in the new TBM framework, that is quickly becoming like a really powerful tool to build these narratives and kind of see everything from the organizational value drivers down to the integrations with NIST or CSDM, and then down to the data and roles you need to get. So I'm going to share this out real quick. I want to see if maybe one or both of you can kind of take us through how you might already be using these new standards to drive these types of conversations.
Yeah, I'll tee it up and then John can go through some examples. But I think one of the biggest things that was very beneficial as we started some of this stuff was like what Matt Temple did from an alignment from TBM to CSDM. And John and I created one on Agile or more around the financial, the capitalization and stuff with Agile framework. But when bringing TBM to an organization, or even if you already have it, but it maybe isn't getting as much traction, there's a lot of conversation around, well, we don't do TBM, we do FinOps, or we don't do TBM, we do this. We have ITSM, we have the CSDM, right? Whatever those standards are, they connect really well. And as John mentioned earlier, alignment with CSDM as well as TBM to make sure you're looking at the same set of services or however you've structured it. So they're talking and they're connecting is key. And so we've talked about this and really wanted to put on paper how you can connect each of those standards. You can very quickly go back to that person and say, I know you have that, and this is how well they work together. And let's talk about those integration points and talk about where we need to get alignment in order to make both of them effective. But they aren't, it's an and, it's not an or conversation.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah, and to Kelley's note, like, this kind of looks like a house with like a little roof at the top and whatnot. And if that's the case, the first layer is literally titled foundations, but those connected standards are very much fundamental to and structurally required for the house. Real plainly, the maturity of your organization in sewing these together will have ricocheting effects as you go up the house. You're going to have cracks in the walls between benchmarking and strategy if you've not worked through how these standards work together. It's one of those things you can say, I'm not going to interconnect them, but what you're going to end up with is very siloed. You're going to end up with townhouses, really, like a lot of siloed things side by side. If
Yeah.
you really want access and the availability to walk into these different rooms, I guess to keep with that analogy unintentionally, you've got to make sure that you've got a cohesive foundation there. And I know that we've labeled the bottom foundations, but equal to the task is these standards and making sure that they sew.
And I would argue that, if you're starting the journey, you don't need to implement every single one of these standards to keep going.
Yeah.
It's ones that you already have, and you want to make sure you have alignment with those teams who have already done a lot of work in creating some of this taxonomy. You want to make sure you have alignment with them, right? If you don't have a super mature FinOps organization, you can still do everything in this house, so to speak, and maybe FinOps builds based on data you have within TBM. But if you do have a mature organization, you're going to want to make sure you're aligning with them, their framework. Again, you don't have to adopt it fully, but there's definitely collaboration between the two and making sure that y'all are talking the same things.
And
And
there's something I was going to add quickly, which was we're seeing this in our data on the council team research side, where a lot of members are coming back to us and they're saying they're really only able to use their TBM practice to push on like financial performance, and they can't really start impacting some of the other big drivers of value for the organization, like the risk and compliance, the sustainability. And when you work your way down through this model, it's a lot of times because they haven't started to look at integrating. A lot of the opportunity to push on those other value drivers is looking at different standards integration like NIST or CSDM. But then a lot of times it does come back to what you were saying, John, that foundational piece. When you're only able to give transparency to the cost or the carbon footprint or the cyber rankings, it's a lot of time the data or maybe the tools or some of the roles that are involved there. And that's the blocker from not being able to actually set strategy and align and optimize on those other outcomes. Go ahead.
well, no,
Yeah.
Justin, I agree 100%, but I also really value and want to double back on and hit it again, what Kelley noted.
Mhm.
It's that age old sentiment that perfection prevents you from moving forward, or pursuit of perfection prevents you from making incremental progress. I had a conversation with an organization that had no TBM practices in place. They were at the very beginning of their journey, and they were like, we can't figure anything out. And I said, that's not true. That's not fair. I was like, do you know how much you spend on IT? Well, yeah. Do you know how much you have in revenue? Yeah. Okay, great. You've got a macroeconomic indicator. And then we proceeded to document like 7 insights that you could do with very little granular data. Of course, the insights get more enriched as you continue on that journey, but it's so important what Kelley said. Like I've got to, tap that buzzer again. There's a maturity roadmap to this. You're not going to be, fully integrated experts, whiz bang, doing all this stuff on day one. And you've got to be willing to chart a path forward and measure out, be deliberate about, that near term, midterm, long term intentionality. Near term, we just need to get X done and stood up. But we know, even on today, that we'd like to eventually bring these disciplines together in this way and whatnot. But definitely get on the road and start walking.
I like it. Absolutely.
And Justin, to your point about cost not being, it's too one-sided of a conversation. Again, you can start your journey there, but if you were evaluating software, right, would cost be the only thing, and like stability and uptime don't matter? you would look at it holistically, right? You would look at what are we getting? What value are we getting? What nuances and issues do we maybe have that we'll need to resolve? And what does resolution of that look like? Each of these different areas. So it can't just be a financial conversation. It also has to be a value conversation.
I like it. So I'm thinking back over the conversation today. We've referenced a couple of great assets that are already out there. Some that you contributed, the TBM for managing the agiles of financial teams. We mentioned the integration with NIST, which is another very popular white paper for TBM Council. We've also got a really high performing one on connecting TBM and CSDM. That's, just as a major accelerator for, I think, for a lot of practices to get some traction in this space. But that does bring me to what, top of mind, what are the big next steps for you guys? What are the big opportunities to leverage TBM and kind of take the next steps in each of your areas in the next year or so?
John, you want to go first?
Yeah. So, what I would argue, my attention, I think, is on more or less the same thing that everyone's attention is on, which is AI. And with that said, though, you go, well, John, I asked you about TBM. TBM is a mindset that you carry with you through all of these items and whatnot. It's not a standalone thing. It's a construct or a way of thinking that you apply as you go out on your journey to deliver technology. So when I loop that back and talk about AI and whatnot, I can tell you that one of the things that I'm looking at is the customer journey mapping across all of my product areas. So what does the customer journey look like for incident, for change, for service desk, for ... all these different things? And then I'm deliberately pausing and asking, what can I do with predictive intelligence or generative AI at those junctures to ease the interaction point and improve it? And then, of course, those become use cases for the longer term dialogue about agentic AI. So like that's really the focal point that I've got right now within ITSM. But in doing that, dialoguing about customer journey maps, dialoguing about what efficiencies this is going to garner us in their dialogue around the customer effort score and whatnot. We're talking about the overall health and performance of my service offerings of this product space and whatnot, and that inherently in and of itself is a TBM mindset. In my opinion. But Kelley, I'll yield the floor to you.
John, I thought you were going to say organizational change management.
That is another one of my babies, but you can talk OCM.
Yeah, I think OCM is always key and always foundational. From my perspective, launching a further OCM campaign around just continued maturity of the CMDB, continued maturity of automation. If we have data somewhere, we're not going to have it in two places, right? There's no efficiency gained from there. So, creating even further automation and efficiencies across the board as we can. That way our engineers can focus on what they are doing is key. And then I think from a TBM perspective, top of mind for me, unrelated to my role, just my interest is around AI, but more of that financial lens. So when we talk tokenization, how do you make it most efficient, knowing input and output tokens and the cost per being different? And how do you, from a Lowe's perspective, when we're enabling our associates, when we have, quite a few, how do you make sure that you have the right costing mechanisms in place? I think we're doing a pretty great job here, but how do you translate that across the board? And how do you create some assets from a TBM perspective that other organizations can leverage?
Fantastic. There's a lot of future opportunity to be mined here. You guys you're really pushing the forefront and making sure that these spaces in ITSM are definitely considered for the impact that they absolutely will have on AI, the other organizational value drivers, like John, you mentioned the customer journey mapping, that customer experience, the sustainability targets, everything like that. So can't wait to see what comes next from both of your experience. We're at about just a few minutes left, so I do want to turn it over to the audience and ask, we've got a couple of minutes here with John and Kelley definitely share any questions you guys have or topics you would love to see us pick up and tackle in the future related to this. Go ahead and drop those into the chat and we'll start responding to them. And as you do that, we made reference to a couple of really great assets here. I'm going to start pasting those into the chat as well, just to shortcut your time to find any of those assets that we mentioned that you are interested in. And we'll go from there. Let's see. And John Kelley, it's okay if maybe a little shy on the questions coming in, but here we go. We've got the link there to log in for the community. And one other call out for our audience out there. So we flashed up earlier the in-work framework and taxonomy 5.0. So we are in a public feedback period for those new standards right now. So if you go to the main tbmcouncil.org page, the very top there, you're going to find a link that will give you a lot of background on the TBM taxonomy proposals and the new framework draft. Would love to get your feedback in there. It'll link you to a survey that you can click through, and you only have to answer the parts you're interested in. It takes about 10 minutes to do it all, but we love to hear from you and integrate your feedback in as we finalize these standards in the coming months. Let me give it one last check for any questions that may have come in.
And team, if there's no questions, that's okay too. The hallmarks, the signatures, one, if you're depending on your persona, there's 50 people on the call and whatnot, carrying TBM, not just from a center portfolio construct or managing tech, but it's actually the mindset, even if you're a practitioner, managing a service or a product like Kelley and myself. So one, it's the mindset. Two, connected disciplines and that journey. Three, to Kelley's note, just get started. Depending on where you're at in your journey and whatnot, just start walking and you'll get there. And then the fourth item that I would throw out there is that, Kelley and I will be at TBM conference this year, and we'll be talking OCM and some
Absolutely.
of those additive flavors. TBM is flywheel and different concepts that we've got going for you. So we'll be happy to chat with you in person if that's more your style.
And real quick, if we can take just 30 seconds, we did have a question come in just right at the line. The question was if we're considering establishing a cost structure or framework that can categorize the various types of AI-related costs, such as infrastructure, model development, data acquisition, ongoing operations. We actually have a great ebook on that using TBM. But John Kelley, if you can talk to you just 30 seconds, we're actually making a lot of additions to the new taxonomy specifically to model all of those cost drivers, all those resources for AI. So let me just turn it to you guys for a quick minute.
Yeah, I was going to say it's in the 4.0 framework. I think it really helps set the foundation. So you can still be in a crawl, walk, run phase wherever you are in your journey from AI costing. But even if you're new to TBM, it really helps establish at least the crawl side of the framework to make sure you're categorizing those costs and thinking about those costs differently. What is AI specific versus regular infrastructure? What's AI specific storage versus regular storage? Things like that. So that you're setting up yourself for success. And then anyone transitioning, it should be an easier transition into the 4.0 framework to continue categorizing these costs differently.
Absolutely. John, any other last comments?
No, I just, the only thing I would add is that there's always a dual persona that we look at with this. Everything that Kelley just articulated and that you articulated is fully accurate for the constructs of delivering AI in and of itself. But we also acknowledge as a council that because of where it's at, it's becoming commoditized, it's becoming ingrained in other technical solutions. So you will have AI in ServiceNow. You will have AI potentially like in an Apptio or AI in a dot. So because of that, we've had a lot of discussion about the deliberate I'm building an AI solution versus I'm leveraging AI within those areas and the possibility of using tags and things like that. And the really important element here is, depending on your persona, if you're, maybe doing more centralized portfolio management, cost management, things like that, is having clarity and awareness of where AI is kind of bubbling up in your portfolio organically, and making sure that your risk models, as you just articulated, like your AM model governance and risk management, is sufficiently addressing all of that, and you're coming up with something cohesive at the end of it. I know
And
we're
we
short on time, but just
same session without talking about value too. So then making sure you're looking at the value side of that AI component, and is the AI addition in that space adding the value that you anticipate it would, or should you course correct?
Thank you so much for that, Capper. Guys, I know we're over time. Thank you so much. John, Kelley, always love hearing from you guys. Looking forward to seeing what's next from TBM Council. And thank you so much for our audience. Follow up with any questions you have, and we'll share out the recording here soon. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.
thanks, everyone. Cheers. Bye.